Hello everyone, welcome back to episode 153 of Arsenal Pass. Hayden Dow here with Brendan Patrick. This week on the pod, Brendan, we're talking about selecting a deck selection, as they call it. First of all, though, I want to ask you, how's the week been? What's been happening?
Yeah, Sasha gets in like an hour. I'm sure he'll be jet lagged. Sasha's a psychopath and he can sleep on airplanes, so maybe he'll be fine. And then, yeah.
No, that's how you get jet lagged, dude. That's how you get jet lagged, sleeping on the planes. If you never go to sleep, then when you get to your destination, just go to sleep at bedtime.
Yeah. If there's anything I've learned over the past 3 years is that you are definitely not the guy to listen to when it comes to sustainability, sleep, and travel. You are wild.
That's true.
So, of course, a lot of in-person testing coming in the next week and a half. We have some draft camps as well locally. Have some really good players in the area that are here to test and to go to that the Hunter Burton Memorial Tournament. Sasha and I will be missing that tournament. It's Blitz, so whatever. We're going to like the Halo World Championships or something because Sasha loves Halo for some reason. I hate Halo because it is.
Is that in Dallas?
Yeah. Yeah. Halo is like my least favorite FPS because, like, in a lot of FPSs that are cross-platform, they give the controller players, like, they give them a little boosty seat. They give them a little aim assist. In Halo, it's like fucking steroids. It's ridiculous. Like the differential between an aim assist controller, sitting on your beanbag playing on the Saturday night. It's just like, it's ridiculous. So like the mouse and keyboard players can't even compete, and that's lame. It's ridiculous. Like you have a 1x1 pivot, right, on your controller, a 1x1, and you're telling me you're competing with a player that is on two different axes, both their wrist and their arm has like a 12-inch squared, I don't know, area to pivot in. You're telling me they can aim better? Like, get the fuck out of here.
What is this? This is the Halo rant. I mean, look, I'm terrible at FPSs. I don't play them because they're just not my sort of thing.
Well, you could play Halo because they just the fucking
might
game
take up Halo then.
Shoots for you at this point. I just kind of hate controller players. I just kind of hate aim assist. Not gonna lie. But overall, I'm not that passionate about the topic.
The true gamer is coming out here.
So a couple weeks ago, you said you were locked on Reinar. How's that going?
No, I never said that. I never said I was locked on Reinar.
Excuse me.
I think you said that I was locked on Reinar, and then you and Sasha told me to send the tweet. So I did.
Bro, this is some revisionist history. Jesus Christ.
I don't think it is. I think this is like you saying that I would dye my hair blonde, which I never said I would do.
You also did back out of that. I mean, this is coming full circle.
Well, I never said that as well. This is classic Brendan Patrick.
Hey, bro, you should get into politics. It's just like, technically, I did not.
Don't worry about technically. I mean, I definitely am during testing. So, I mean, yeah, I've been testing a week still. I fly out next. What are we today? Today we're recording timestamp. We're recording on your Monday, my Tuesday morning. I fly out Wednesday next week, my time, which is Tuesday evening, your time. So I got like maybe a week of testing left, give or take. And I mean, I really wanted to play Reinar. That is 100% true. I would love to play Reinar. I spent a lot of time playing Reinar. I think I played over 100 games with Reinar actually in this format, which is insane and probably too many, right? I actually was trying to record a deck tech this week and get that out, but it's just been too hard timing-wise. I really like Reinar. I think Reinar is actually pretty good in this format. I don't think it's good enough, and that's kind of where I'm at. So, yeah, not locking Reinar, Brennan.
Yep. Yeah, I'm probably playing Kano. So Sasha actually...
You're playing what?
Kano. Sasha doesn't...
KO?
Yeah.
KO?
No. I'll probably play Kano. Sasha's coming and he does... For the first time, he's like, oh, I don't want to play that deck, etc. But he's like, you could convince me. He like,
that's always the
a little
way.
wink, and I'm like, okay. And so we also have Peter and Majin Bay coming to Texas for the Hunter Burton tournament. So we're going to get a few days of testing with those guys, and they've been cooking on Kano. They believe they have an edge in the mirror. We had Peter on the other week, and he mentioned that. So maybe we'll get some lessons and get to play the cool deck at the tournament. I think that the tournament is going to be ridiculously overtech for Kano, but c'est la vie, as we say, right?
I think there's going to be a lot of Kano.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about it with Peter last week, but like teching for Kano isn't
that effective.
The easiest thing, yeah, or effective often. So, yeah, we'll see. Yeah, I mean, so Sasha flying to Dallas you're testing in Dallas. You've got some drafts happening. You've got obviously, you're gonna be playing a reasonable amount. You're gonna get angry at some Halo players apparently during that time.
I wouldn't call them players, but yeah, sure.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, sure, there we go. You're gonna challenge Sasha to a 1v1 keyboard and mouse Halo match apparently as well. And then you're coming to LA on what day?
Thursday. In and out. LA, I'll tell you. For future Pro Tours, future tournaments, please don't put it in LA. That city it's okay. So I lived in LA for like 6-7 years. It's definitely, it has its nice areas, it has its bad areas. I'd say overall it's kind of more, I don't know, it's not that great as like a location to travel to. It's also so expensive. Like it's ridiculous. Not only the hotel's ridiculous, the flights are ridiculous, the Ubers are insane. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've ever been in and out for a Pro Tour before. This is the first time.
I think you usually stay.
Yeah, I had to draw the line. Like LA is just, it's not worth it, and it's more expensive than pretty much every other place on planet Earth for God knows what reason. But yeah, in and out Thursday.
Been to LA a couple of times now. One of my least favorite places in the world.
Yeah,
it's funny. I have a colleague, and it's like one of their favorite like places. They're always in LA, and I asked them, I was like, "What do you like about LA?" And I feel like
I lived there. I liked it a lot, to be honest. I liked it a lot when I lived there.
Being a local was good.
Yeah, but I didn't live in like a super bad area. Like I lived close to the airport, and I went to school out there. I didn't live like downtown. It didn't take me 2 hours to get everywhere, and it was fine, to be honest. I actually really enjoyed it, but ultimately as like a destination to travel to, I don't think it's worth it. Like, I guess if you're coming internationally, you're like, oh, I'll see the Hollywood sign and stuff. Like, it's okay. It's not that cool.
I had a question for you. Just going back to Flesh and Blood now. What is your goal in the next week of testing? I think this is something I wanted to ask you actually, just generally, but I think it's interesting because you're going to do quite an intensive testing, over the next week. Like, you started testing, you were testing a bit, you were doing a lot of like observing, then you kind of pulled back for a week knowing that you'd have this kind of final week of like a lot of testing, right? Like high volume reps, draft camps, etc. What do you want to achieve over the next week? Because this is kind of going to set up our main topic of the pod actually when it comes to deck selection.
Yeah, I want the largest edge possible over the general field that's at the Pro Tour, and I want to be competent enough at both draft and class constructed to put myself in a position to get lucky. That's it. That's it. Like, I don't think at this stage, I think it's both unrealistic and too time consuming to be like, I want to be the absolute best player in the room and I want to be the world champion and nobody can be better than me. It's just not realistic for the current time I have at my disposal, even my sort of passion for the game. Like it's a lot right now. The game is ultra competitive. And I think that a more realistic goal is like, you just want to be in a position to get lucky. And it's very hard in Flesh and Blood to do that. You have to be extremely good at the game. Like people will tell you in TCGs all the time, it's like, you have to be super good and it has to be your day. Flesh and Blood is that times 10, right? Like you have to be an exceptional world-class player and it has to be your day. So like when I say I want to be proficient enough to be really good against the general field, like that is very proficient at playing Flesh and Blood, in my opinion. Like this is a very hard game.
It's a split format. It's draft and CC as well. I mean, yeah, you definitely have to have luck on your side to win any event on any given day. I think you can't, you can play to your best of your ability, 90 to 95% of your ability. I think it's very hard to play at 100% in this game. I think I've rarely seen it. But even when you get to that point, you still have to have a lot of things go your way. So, yeah, I agree. Okay, that's interesting. Well, do you want to take us in?
Yep. Before we go into the regular podcast, I just want to mention that this episode is sponsored by Magnolia Games. You can find them at magnoliagames.com. Whether you're looking for booster boxes to practice draft for the Pro Tour, you need singles to upgrade your class constructed deck, you can find it at magnoliagames.com. They have a booth at pretty much every single event, so go up and check them out at Pro Tour LA. And don't forget, if you do go to the website, magnoliagames.com, use code Arsenal10 to let them know you came from the podcast. We appreciate everybody who uses that code. It really helps us out. Let's get into it.
You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a Flesh and Blood podcast for players by players, and all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
let's get into the news, Brendan. And last week on the pod, we had a bit of a giveaway for Battle Hardened Kiel. And we have a winner. You asked, what did you ask for? Just to remind everyone out there, Brendan, what did you ask for in the comment section? Because I said, hey, let us know, what deck you might take to the Pro Tour, a big event. And you said wrong answers only, right?
Yeah. This is from Fortermure 386. Fortermure. Sorry, I'm so scared of reading names out after you put out that challenge to our audience. They say,
I'll put out a challenge.
I'll play Big Betsy. Pure value. Spending three cards 9. Overpower is amazing. Why would you play Brute and do swing big? 2 cards for 8. Overpower is so good that makes your opponent thinking about blocks. And you kind of have to bet big to maybe win your games. I'm for it. I'm sold. This is like the value prop I hear every time from Bravo players. They're like, oh, but I can dominate my crippling crush. Bruh.
Yeah, big instead. My favorite thing, I think, is that Brendan forgot that he said wrong answers only. And I think he was skimming the YouTube comments and getting a bit confused about the YouTube comments last week.
Honestly,
when it came to wrong answers only.
I thought it was par for the course for some of the YouTube comments that we get. I was like, these people are crazy. I'm kidding. I have the memory of an absolute goldfish.
That is true. So, for Tim Muir, they can't be anyway. I also commented to let them know they won. Flick us an email, arsenalpassfab@gmail.com, and we'll get you sorted out with that Battle Hardened ticket. Thanks to the team over there running Battle Hardened Kiel. Very exciting, happening this coming weekend in the lead up to PT. Also, just want to shout out, we did have a Battle Hardened over the weekend. This is kind of Battle Hardened season. We have Battle Hardens usually either side of the PTs. I think, which is good, because it does mean I know people are traveling to Philly this weekend. There's some players who have been playing in our wider testing group. One of them, or a couple of them, were actually at the Battle Harden last weekend as well. Where was the Battle Harden last weekend? So it was Philly, and then Dallas is this weekend, right? So, players able to, I guess, travel to these events. I think it'd be great. I still want to see this. It's like, if I'm going to travel to a Pro Tour in, let's say, Amsterdam, right? Mm-hmm. I think a calling the week after is so we've done the calling the week before, right? But they're often quite far away. I think I'd love to see a calling the weekend after in a similar location. Like if I'm going to go have my holiday after PT Amsterdam, maybe just a cheeky calling. I don't know, somewhere adjacent. Maybe popping back to Belgium or France or something, getting a calling in.
Yeah,
but they previously have done them the week before, but we'll see. I think for Worlds, it's generally like, okay, calling 2 weeks before Worlds, then Worlds. I'd love to see it calling a little bit closer in. And honestly, actually, I'd rather see it afterwards in a different format, maybe like Limited or Blitz or whatever.
I wish Legend Story Studios would think more about sort of lifestyle when they put on these Pro Tours and World Championships, and how they try to put on events in a way that people can string together larger scale trips and sort of make it worth it for traveling for the game. I think one of the least rewarding things about Pro Tours and World Championships, or one of the least rewarding sort of behaviors you can have, is to fly in, fly out. I think that sucks. And if you're traveling around the world, especially if you don't travel very much, you don't get the chance to actually see the city or experience the culture. I think that's a huge shame. And I do like it when Legend Story Studios potentially takes that into consideration, and the weekend after, or even during that month, they put on other events that incentivize you to maybe stay around. I think that's fantastic.
They have, I think, for Worlds, there was the Battle Hardened the weekend after in Italy, right? Which is very cool, right? So that's a very good incentive. I know a few players went to that. So I think they have been thinking more about it. I think the next thing I'd love to see is, like a calling post a Pro Tour could be really cool. But maybe they think it's not going to get the numbers, and maybe they're right. Maybe it's too niche for people, or burnout happens, things like that, or people can't justify it. But
yeah, I mean, speaking of numbers, like, why is the tournament at the PT Dallas or Battle Hard Dallas? Why is it Blitz?
Oh, I actually didn't even know it was. So it is Blitz. I guess I thought it was CC. I didn't realize it was Blitz.
No, there is a PTI event that's CC that people are coming to play, but what the doesn't make any sense to me. It's like, I think if they care about numbers at all, it's like, why would you do that?
I guess I didn't know that, but I would think that for some reason I thought it was CC. I guess the reason to have Blitz in the lead up to that is, we're kind of a week out from the Pro Tour. Are people going to show up with their CC decks? I don't know. I would have thought,
100%. They flew here for the PTI event just to show up with their CC decks. I mean, I know that
it's good practice.
Yeah, I know that my circle is maybe not indicative of the entire place of player base of Flesh and Blood, and I said maybe as a joke, like it obviously is not, but a lot of people look at that Blitz event and it is a complete waste of time. Like we are in crunch time for the Pro Tour. Why is the event Blitz? I can't think of a worse form. You could have made it limited. Like it just doesn't make any sense to me. It's a bummer because if there was an actionable and relevant way to practice for the Pro Tour via a tournament in Dallas, that would have been fantastic, and that is not the case.
I'll take the other side of it though. I guess you're going to allow players who aren't these hard grinders who are coming in for the PT to play some Blitz and maybe spike themselves a PTI and a gold foil, which is interesting.
Yeah, it's weird because even at my local armory level, like I don't know, I just feel like people they're just spikes, bro. Like I don't know, they're hyper focused on metagame, class constructed, draft, and even if they aren't going to the PT, like they're playing PT formats and practicing with the other people that are going. Like I could just be in a weird area, but yeah, that's
what Magic used to be like. I remember, like you'd kind of have. You'd have if you had like tiers, right? Maybe tier 3 is like your more casual local player, and then tier 2 is like the grinders, and tier 1 maybe those are like the players going to the Pro Tour. I feel like it was always like that in local stores. I went to for Magic as well.
Mm-hmm.
But, anyway, let's move on. Let's what do we want to talk about first? ProQuest Season 5 is happening April 13th to May 5th. Don't know if you knew this, Brendan. Mm-hmm. It is only classic constructed. Kasai, Betsy, and KO rainbow foils for top 8. Gold foil, of course, for the winner. I think most of these events, if you go and check out the Fab TCG event finder, most of these events are starting to go in. I know, like for me locally, I think a couple of the ProQuest have already been scheduled. So I would say, if not by now, they should mostly all be scheduled. It starts within a month. So yeah, be interesting. CC only is interesting. I guess because we're going to have a new draft format coming out very soon after this ProQuest season, we're going to head to a new limited format, which will be the limited format we will play for the national season, which I'm excited to see, obviously, what the set is. We know a little bit about it at the moment, apart from this fail. We know that the World Premiere is happening in Tokyo, but we'll have to see what that looks like for nationals. But yeah, CC only for ProQuest Season 5. A couple of things as well. Let's check, because we're talking about Kano and you're talking about your circle, etc. And Kano episode last week, a little bit of follow up, Brendan. Kano wins the PTI event at Battleheart in Philly on the weekend, and also that was a Kano mirror. I think Caleb was in the final with which is Peter's teammate who came on the pod last week,
and they were specifically like, we cracked the Kano mirror, and then they showed it.
Hey, well, you can go watch that video if you're looking at how to play the Kano mirror. And then Kano also makes the final the day before at Battleheart in Philly, at the actual Battleheart itself. So, and then congrats to the winner at Battleheart in Philly. It was a Zuri player who ended up taking that out. Any thoughts? I guess Kano looking pretty good for the PT, right? Like, I mean, we talked about, like, it wasn't just people were like, oh, you memeing on a Kano episode. It's like, no, I genuinely think Kano is like a top 3 deck for this PT.
Yeah, Kano was really not the deck that I wanted to play from like a theory perspective a couple weeks ago, but the fire
starts to burn.
It does start to burn. I still, like, me and Hayden were talking before the pod, I still think the deck is fundamentally inconsistent. And I'm not drastically, I would prefer to say, even though it's a double, it's like, I don't know if this is grammatically correct. I'm not convinced that the deck is fundamentally consistent. I'm not going to say it's fundamentally inconsistent, but I'm not sure that it is actually consistent. And that is very incongruent with my plan to have the greatest edge against the general field.
Yep.
So,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, Kano's an interesting one, right? Because your most powerful game plan revolves around one specific card, right? And obviously there's iterations of that, but one particular card drives a massive amount of over the top, above the average card rate in that deck, right? Whereas, without that, you can definitely win games, but it just looks a lot different. And is less, like you say, less consistent. So, I thought that was interesting over the week. And then LSS did something that I thought was actually pretty awesome, to be honest, which is they released this PT preview video, which honestly, did you watch this? Like, the production value of this video was really, really high, which I think is super exciting for LSS doing these kind of things in the future, because they've done videos in the past. We had the Devastation series going back a couple of years ago, which I'd love to see them bring back at some point. They've had, kind of these videos, these like pack one, pick one videos they've done. They've started to produce a bit more content as time's gone on. But this one, which is like a roundtable with the developers in particular, it's Brian Gottlieb, Carol, Kieran, and Jayli and Jason.
Yeah.
They're sat at what basically looks like a studio. Like, it looks like they've got the specific area to make content and produce content. And then so if you don't know, LSS moved to new offices at the start of this year. they're really nice. They're a lot bigger. They can accommodate their growing team. But yeah, I thought this looked awesome.
Come on. Like, if you didn't see this coming, like Brian Gottlieb is already doing so many things that are, I guess, outside of the realm of being a game designer and the lead developer. You know, he's like, he's kind of like the liaison between us. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you can say, oh, they had 4 developers on the panel. They actually had like 75% of the people on there are basically professional podcasters. Like, I don't know if people know about Carol and Kieran, but they used to do Session Blood, which was the first Flesh and Blood podcast. And I mean, it really set the bar for what became Flesh and Blood podcasting. It's natural. I was not surprised to see it. I'm happy that they put effort into it. I would be surprised if they didn't put effort into it and didn't execute it correctly with Brian Gottlieb on there, knowing he knows how to podcast. Let's be fucking real. It's great. Like, I think that, like, when these companies don't do stuff like that, when they don't have a way to engage with their audience like that feels so personable, like, I feel like they just leave money on the table. I really do. And it blows my mind that they don't have podcasts like this. Like, they don't do that, especially with access to talent like Carol, Kieran, Brian, etc. So I'm happy to finally see it. And I think they executed it fantastically. Like, it looks like a legit, just top tier produced podcast, and it's fantastic. I mean, from the angles, from the mics, and the whole studio setup, like, it's what I wish Arsenal Pass could be, but it literally will never, because we record remotely.
I wish we could record in person.
Yeah,
so many opportunities when you can do that. Let's talk a little bit about the video. It's short. It's like 27 minutes. It's to the point. I think they discuss things pretty pointedly from their view. Again, you know, this is for people who have obviously designed these sets, play tested these sets, developed this particularly heavy hitters rant, which is having a massive impact on this format. But at the same time, also, you know, they're removed from this from a degree in terms of, you know, they're not playing the current format. The format is evolving as the metagame evolves. They're like a year plus removed from actually playing a lot of these cards, right? And they're testing and development. Obviously, they'll still be playing with some of them because of how testing evolves. But let's go first. They had a big old hard on for Reiner, Brendan, I think. Well, particularly, not surprising, I guess, Carol, Karen, but even Jason was pretty high on Reiner for this PT as well. Do you think, like, because I would say, like, in our, you know, well, specifically in my testing, like, I've had a lot of Reiner. Reiner is one that I think is going to be a really hard pick for this meta. I think you're really trying to target a much narrow. So I think there's a couple of ways you can build Reiner. I think there's 2 particular ways. You can either hard lean into full intimidate, claws plan, like a combo style damage deck, or you can lean into the more value style of Reiner now because of things like agility. And I think they were describing to me, to what I was hearing, more of a deck that sounds like this kind of big damage, dump your hand, intimidate away, remove choices kind of Reiner deck. But they were like really high on it. Like some of them were picking it in like their top 8s and stuff.
Okay. I mean, I wasn't going to that video for advice on what deck to play for the Pro Tour.
No, it just was interesting.
Yeah.
It's a preview video that is branded as a preview video for the PT and for things to watch out for. And they talk a lot about Brute. So I guess, okay, take a step back, a little bit of a higher view. You love your, 10,000 views. They're talking about Brute, I guess, is maybe the most impactful class for this PT. Do you agree?
I think it's one of the most impactful. I think that the Brute cards from the new set are insane. And I think that Brute, at least for a long time, I'm not sure if it still is because I took a little bit of a break, was sort of the value litmus test we were testing decks against. Because if they couldn't exceed what some of the Brutes were doing, there just wasn't a reason to play them. And I think that's a fair assessment. Like, that's a fair level 1 assessment of heavy hitters and how it impacted the class constructed meta. Does it hold true as we're 2 weeks out from the Pro Tour? Maybe not. Again, I don't really know. But I think that them being high on Brute is pretty par for the course with a set that had a large amount of Brute cards come in that are very, very powerful. And Carol and Kieran they've been Brute sims for like, I don't know, what is it, 4 years at this point? Is that I expected?
Yeah. They do like Brute. Illusionist was talked about in this video, but maybe not the one you're expecting. Prism, a lot of chat about Prism and what a Prism deck could maybe look like if it showed up into a particular meta. They seem to think that Prism could have an impact on this event.
Mm-hmm.
Less so did they talk about Dromai. Any thoughts on that?
We've talked about Prism on the podcast. I don't know. I don't love the deck.
When it does the thing.
Yeah,
when it does the thing.
I know
it's
that.
insane.
But I don't love the deck, and I've explained it why. And then the only retort I get for my issues of the deck are, oh, but like you didn't play it right. And it's like, okay, fine. Like, I guess, sure. So for me, we tested it. We put effort into it, not an insane amount, and ultimately came away a little bit unimpressed. And that could be a pilot diff. That could be a pilot issue. But it was not immediately apparent the issues or the mistakes that we were making in order for that to be a good choice for the PT. And I think that Jermai owns, and I've thought that literally since the last Pro Tour, and I was banging the freaking drum on that deck. I wasn't as high on it on this cycle around. I didn't necessarily think it was the best deck or the deck to beat, but I mean, I think Jermai is one of like the last resemblance of like Flesh and Blood 1.0 still left in the game in terms of power level and what it does.
Yeah. I think you're kind of, I agree. And I think Jermai looks really good, right? And I think that's kind of hard to dispute. It's had a really good Road to Nationals run. I was surprised to not hear the dev team talk about it too much in terms of their predictions and talk a little about Prism. But I will say there's been some Prism truthers on the wider testing team that we've worked with, and I've watched some Prism games, and I do think when you really understand that deck, there is some power to extract from it, and it is just naturally very powerful, and I think you can tweak and tune it even a little bit more. But yeah, I kind of agree. I think but I will also say, right, if the meta changes and brutes kind of drop away, let's say KO is not the be-all end-all, it kind of falls away. It's not the number one. It's not even the number 2 most played deck. Maybe it's number 3. Rhinar doesn't show up. Leviah kind of isn't all that people are touting it to be. All of a sudden, Prism's kind of worst matchups, start to fade away a little bit, and Prism does look pretty good. So, we'll see. A couple of last quick things. I did like that they did get to make their predictions, some wild predictions in there. I think someone predicted a Katsu making top 8. They do give a big shout out to Team Blue Pitch. They kind of talk about some of the players to watch. Obviously, Team Blue Pitch dominated Worlds.
I have some pushback there. How many 80-player North American Battle Hardens has Team Blue Pitch won?
Wow, that's true. I don't think they've won any, actually, Brendan. So
I don't know how they're in the conversation then. I'm just going to put it out there. I don't know how they're in the conversation. If they're not taking down 50 to 80-player U.S. Battle Hardens, who the fuck are they?
Well, we'll scrap that one. I think that's obviously clear that they're not up to scratch, so don't worry about it, Team Blue Pitch. All right, Brendan, I think that's going to do it for the news. Again, I'd love to see LSS make more of these videos. I had a great time watching that. Let's go Commander Cookout. We've got a couple of questions actually this week from the Discord. If you're a patron of ours, then you have access to our community Discord. A couple of quick questions in here. First one is from Oz Rotten. Classic Constructor precons were announced at Gamma, which is a convention, for those that don't know, with some teaching favorites like Fire and Dash nearing Living Legend. Are there any heroes that you're hoping to see or not see in this product? So just for a quick bit of context, there was a convention that happened, an industry convention, and which is over in the US. It's called Gamma. And LSS announced some new products to support stores. So they talk about 3 standalone booster sets in 2024, booster, draft, and sealed formats driven, improved Blitz deck configuration. So there's return of exclusive content to Blitz decks, early access Blitz deck sales at pre-release weekend to coincide with the drops of new sets. So the 3 booster sets. And then they also talked about these. They showed these new precons, which are these like something that we've been asking for a long time, Brennan. A deck that's pick up and play for Classic Constructed that you can teach someone with, you can hand to someone can take to an armory and start to slowly upgrade, plug and play, right? That's something we've been asking for a very long time that isn't the Classic Battles thing. They do also, something that I want to talk about because there's another question here, which is from Marco saying, also from the same presentation, they said they're aiming for product releases up to 11 months of the year. Is this exciting or worrisome? And basically from this presentation directly, they say increased release frequency and product range, staying top of mind for players, new player onboarding products, aiming for releases up to 11 months of the year, building from mid-2024. To be fair, I think when they say the increased releases, I think they're talking about these standalone decks. They're talking, there's 3 booster sets per year. The other products is like auxiliary products by the sounds of it.
Good or bad?
Well, let's start with the Classic Constructed precons. I think good, 100%. I think we've been asking for this for a very long time. Fire and Dash, I don't know. I don't know what heroes I would have picked. I think Fire is a good hero for people to pick up and play with to start with, right? And I think it's easy. There's a lot of commons and rares and then a couple of majestics, and you can plug and play with like, okay, I've been enjoying this. I'm going to play the game. I'm going to go pick myself up a Furnace, right? That's going to be my first pickup, for instance. Very easy to kind of work from. People can make content on the back of this, I think.
Yep. Dash
similar.
Permanence on board. You're coming from Magic or some other game. You get to do that thing in our game too.
Dash. Yeah, I agree. So I think those good. In terms of Ozrotten's question about others that I would like to see, I mean, I think once we get to the new set, I think coinciding something with maybe one of the better heroes, some heavy hitters, I think KO could be a good one for that to add in. There's a lot of kind of plug and play upgradable sort of card slots for KO if you went with kind of like a mid-power, some number of majestic sort of piece to it. I think I think KO would be another one. I think I would avoid some of, I wouldn't make a Dromo one, for instance. I wouldn't make a Kano one.
Why not? So I dropped Grand Archive as a game, but one of my favorite things about Grand Archive is they had, I don't know, a little bit of courage with their starter decks. They were actually really fun. And one of those decks was a combo.
Yeah, they were actually. I played a couple of games.
Yeah, one of those was a Kano deck, and that's sick. Like, there's this idea that it's too complex for the layman, and maybe it's a little bit harder to play, but it's cool to have an introductory experience that shows you like the actual depth of this game and like some of the sort of atypical things you can do that's not mid-range gameplay. I think that's sick. I think Kato could definitely be there. I'm not saying that I'm looking forward to that or it's something they should do, but I don't think it's out of the question. There's one of my favorite things about Grand Archive is their starter decks are sick. Yeah, they're awesome.
To be fair, I wasn't going to say it, then you said don't say it, so then I said it. I actually kind of agree, Kano will be fine. I mean, I think at least some amount of arcane damage in some of these starters could be great. So something like maybe Viserai, once we get a new weapon printed in the next set, could be a go-to. Ooh. What do you think about this? Marco asked about the product releases.
Let's hear you first.
Well, obviously, like just hearing 11 months of the year product releases sounds worrying. Does sound worrisome because
how are we going to get that Billy though?
The what?
The Billy. How are we going to get to the Billy in revenue?
Oh, right. The $1 billion. Gotcha. Look, I mean, if it's 3 booster sets per year and a lot of auxiliary products for new players, onboarding, kind of special events, things like that, I'm okay with that. What I would worry about is that they talk about these blitz decks and exclusive content. So
that's like annoying. Agreed.
It's because we've experienced before. If it's like alt arts and reprints of different kind of treatments, etc., collector's items, I'm okay with it. If it's, let's say, Civic Steps in the Professor's box, or it's Glint, like run through, or Glint in the classic battles, I'm less keen on that. The big part of that is that obviously that incentivizes kind of buying these products for players that aren't maybe necessarily the first or the primary target demographic in the players' minds, which is new players. But also just more shit to buy is kind of annoying sometimes.
Yeah, as a consumer, I think it's scummy. As a like from a business perspective, maybe it's correct to sell more of that product. Yeah. But Civic Steps in the Professor thing, pretty lame. Like, I didn't like it. Would be pretty disappointed if they did it again. I think the feedback was generally negative in regards to that. So ultimately, is it going to kill me like as a player, and is it going to make the game unsustainable? No, but it's just annoying, and it shows that I don't think they have our best interest in mind sometimes when they put very, very powerful pieces of equipment in product that is not necessarily directed at players that are going to be using those and high level events. So I find that to be frustrating at the very least, but it doesn't. I don't know. I don't lose sleep at night over it. 11 out of 11 months of the year, I think it's fine. I think product fatigue as a critique in any game is, I think it's kind of weird, right? Like, we had this. So this is I know.
Dude, have you played Magic?
I know, but I would honestly, as a player, I know it's not across the board, and for standard, maybe it's too much, but like, I would rather there be more products than not. And I think that one of the comparisons I would draw is the Flesh and Blood Pro Tour. When we had the 2 Pro Tours, and then people complained because they're like, we're traveling to
the same draft format.
Yeah. They were too close together, and then we had 1 Pro Tour, and that was infinite. It was way worse. It's way worse. I think that I would rather have an abundance of choice when they're putting all these cards in products that I don't want to buy. That's a bit frustrating, but I don't really enjoy. I don't really agree with the product fatigue sort of critique. I think it's okay. It is funny though. It is a bit ironic because Flesh and Blood came to market with the philosophy and the value prompt that, like, hey, we're not going to do this. And now they're doing it. That was one of the things that Flesh and Blood said. Is like, we don't want to overload our consumer base, and like, we don't want to do it. Basically, Flesh and Blood, like, their original pitch was just like a lot of this like anti-New Age Magic, right? Like all this stuff that New Age Magic the Gathering is doing, we're not going to do that. And I feel like year by year, we get closer and closer and closer to that. And I don't necessarily have an issue with that, but it is incongruent for some of the reasons that sold me on the game in 2019. But again,
yeah.
Yeah.
Again, I think if we're sticking to like 3, I really would be worried if we saw 4 major set releases a year. I think that would start to concern me. Or just 4. Don't worry about major. Just 4 set releases per year. I think if there was 3 in 1, so like 3 draftable sets and 1 supplementary set, I think I'd be okay with it. But it does start to get a lot as a player of the game and a consumer of the game. I do have one solution I would love them to implement, and I think they're starting to do this a little bit more, which is when they print cards like Civic Footsteps or Run Through or whatever, immediately make these Armory promos. Just immediately make them Armory promos. That might have maybe the other consequences I'm not thinking about, but I think I would love to see that, because it's a small amount of distribution, right? But it does it in a way that creates some more access for certain players. And
yeah, I think that your critique supposes that the Civic Seps things was like an accident, like an oopsie, and I don't think it was.
No, I don't.
Yeah, I think that they're doing it on purpose, and as long as it doesn't affect the game in a negative way, they're going to keep doing it. They want you to keep buying those products that you don't have interest
which is
in.
fine.
Yeah,
but a smaller distribution of these promos, and they're different as well, right? So,
yeah.
Anyway, we can move on. People are going to get friggin' yelled at, man. We're 30 minutes in. 30 minutes and we haven't hit the main topic, so we gotta get a wriggle on. Speaking of yelling and pointing fingers, Brendan, main topic of the pod: deck selection, how to choose a deck, why to choose a deck, all things when it comes to choosing a deck. Really, I think poignant right now as we head towards the Pro Tour, especially for ourselves, right? Like we're a week out from the Pro Tour. He's reading the start of the notes. I think you got to lean into this. All right?
I swear to God, I didn't read the bold under main topic, and it was like, okay. I literally did that at the start of the pod without... Oh my God, that's so funny. That's so funny to me.
Kind of. Yeah, you kind of already did it. But there's... I think as we kind of dive deeper, and we did a pod a few months ago at this point, right, before Heavy Hitters, which was like why you should be a specialist in Flesh and Blood right now, like what the rewards are for being a specialist. And I think that's one aspect to it, right? And the whole kind of polar opposite to that, right, is not being a specialist. And I think at some point we'll talk a little bit more about that. We might bring on someone who is kind of notorious for switching decks, maybe, or maybe that's just me. I don't know, whatever. But I think the other side of it is that whether you're a specialist or you're a part-time specialist, in terms of you specialize in a few different heroes, or you just generally play the game, learn heroes, and want to play the best deck, like deck selection is a really big part of the game for probably like 70 to 90% of players who are playing at a competitive or a competitive plus level, I would say. So it's like a tough part of the game, deck selection, I think. Like, I think it's like, honestly, like if you attribute deck selection to success at a high level event, like what kind of percent do you think you would attribute to the success being down to deck selection?
Like selecting the right deck for the event?
Yeah.
Sorry, you caught me off guard because you stopped talking. I thought the Holy Ghost creeped up on you for a sec, but
I just choose my words, man.
A major part. I mean, there's a larger topic here too, which is metagame prediction, which is like, arguably it's like equally as important as gameplay skill. Deck selection it's massive. I know that, so that is, that's sort of antithetical to this idea that you can be a specialist and do well at events, but I do think that accurately predicting the metagame is really, really important for doing well in an event, and I think it's pretty close to...
It's not mutually exclusive, because you can, work your hero to fit the meta, right?
Yeah. Okay. I think it's massive. I think picking the right deck for an event at a high-level event like a Pro Tour of the World Championships is... I spend most of my time doing that. Like... So let's talk about...
This is actually play.
Yeah. Well, no, let's talk about some of the critiques we've had of our testing processes in the past few years.
Sure.
What does it usually come down to when we walk away from an event? We're like, okay, we fucked up. What do we do? We usually didn't...
Not selecting a deck early enough.
We usually didn't get enough reps or practice on the deck because we spent so much time trying to find the right deck for the metagame. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. And I think that our balance is something we've had to learn about over the past few years. But I would argue that more often than not, trying to find the right deck and trying to tune the right deck takes up more of the testing process than this idea of like just jamming games and getting that sort of pattern recognition and just like general flow of your deck in place. Like I think we spend more time trying to pick the deck and predict the metagame.
So if you were to say this, let's say there's 3 pillars, and there's more, but let's just for the sake of this say there's 3 pillars. One pillar is deck selection. One pillar is like your skill and your reps, and let's say some of that can be learned, some of it can be inherent. And then the third pillar is metagame prediction. So deck selection, metagame prediction, skill/reps. If I said to you, hey, you've got your character, you're building a character, Brendan, you get 10 points, effectively 100% to select for each of these. Where are you putting it in terms of importance to build the best character?
Well, that's pretty tough. Because I would have it's hard to know if I put 1 point into play, how much worse I would be than other people. Because Flesh and Blood is a game where, arguably, if you put 10 points into gameplay skill, and you actually play to 100% proficiency, you might actually be able to beat most people.
Okay, all right, let's get off that.
Okay.
Just say
I'll just give you a general idea.
It's the average player, it's the average competitive player as in terms of skill level. So let's say maybe it's less so skill, it's more so reps. And
I'd probably put 5 into metagame prediction and split across the other 2. Yeah, 5. I think if you can accurately predict a metagame,
okay,
it's the most important thing. And I mean accurately predict a metagame.
So if you can accurately predict a metagame, right, then surely the deck selection has to be super important as well, because then you have to select the correct deck.
Yeah, but I think so. That's what's hard about this point system. No, but I would rather I'd rather be more correct on the metagame prediction than because the deck really just follows after that, right? It really just follows after. But
it can do, yeah. It's a lot of the time.
Basically, let's be a bit more abstract. What I'm trying to say is that metagame prediction is extremely important. Extremely important. And I think that is so critical to the success of a player and especially a team in an event. I think a lot of the reasons that team exist is to come together and pool their brain power to figure out what the expected metagame is, and then from there, figure out what the best decks are. That is what teams do.
Mm-hmm. So, because I agree, if metagame prediction is super important, right, which I agree it is, that would insinuate or infer that deck selection is also very important, right? Because you can predict the metagame, but if that doesn't impact your deck selection, so let's say, I'm number 1 Azalea Stan, or I'm number 1 Dromai, Lockerina, and those are the decks I play. That's what I'm playing. Doesn't matter. But I'm very proficient at predicting the meta. What do I do with that information?
Yeah,
if I'm already locked on my hero,
it's like the Peter Budensek fallacy. It's he's
here you go,
really good.
But he pretends like he's gonna play things at Arcano.
I know, and then he just plays Kano and he loses sometimes. Yeah, I mean,
so Peter could predict the metagame, right? He could have his 5 stat points in metagame prediction. But if he's got 0 points in deck selection because he's going to play the same thing every time, what? So I guess my question, is just what's the so what of it? If you can predict the meta, your deck selection is still super important. So right?
Let's say we put,
or is it?
Let's say we put 10 points into deck selection. That would probably negate the
metagame prediction.
Yeah, because
they go hand in hand.
Because if you select the right deck, you're selecting the right deck for the right metagame, and you understand the metagame. That's your deck selection it's like. We have step 1 and step 2. Step 1 is metagame prediction. Step 2 is deck selection. And then somewhere mixed in there is are you good enough to play the deck? You practice enough on the deck? That's sprinkled on there.
Okay. I think this sets the stage really for having this discussion. I think just to also set the stage for how important I think deck selection is, I'll just do a little bit I'll use my 10 points, right? I think I'm always sticking 5 into let's not talk at skill, let's talk at reps, right? If I'm talking it's reps on the deck, I'm gonna stick 4 points in there. I actually think reps is really important, especially if you're not just like myself, you're not just naturally super talented at the game. You need the reps. I'm definitely one of those players who needs the reps. I'm gonna stick 4 points in there.
That's fucking fake news, bro. Hayden is one of the most naturally talented Flesh and Blood players I know. That is so fucking false. Oh my god.
I'm going 4 points in. I don't think that's true. I'm going 4 in reps, and I'm going to go 3 and 3 metagame prediction and deck selection. So I think they go hand in hand. There you go. Or maybe I'll go 3 in reps, 3 points in reps, and then I'll go 3 in metagame prediction, 4 in deck selection, because you need that information. But anyway, deck selection is super important. So let's get into fake news.
It is fake news. There's been multiple times. Sorry. I interrupted. But there's been multiple times where last minute we swap Hayden on our deck and he does better than all of us on the fucking deck. Multiple times. Actually, almost every time. It's true.
Okay. PT1, Sasha made top 8. So didn't do better.
You did pretty good though. You did really good. I mean, you were almost there too. Yeah, you were one game away.
PT Lille, I guess I swapped late. Kind of, not really. I was playing quite a lot of Briar at that event. And I think that's it. I honestly think that's the only times I've swapped. The only other time I've swapped late or swapped late.
You swapped it
Worlds
Barcelona?
last year.
You've actually swapped it every single time.
This is about to say Worlds last year, where I didn't actually test the Classic Constructor for the event, really. I'd been playing some Dash in that season, but I hadn't really tested. And so I went back to the deck I'd played for the Callings, which was Dromai. But I don't know if that's a late swap so much as that was just I didn't do any of the preparation.
And then you played Kano at the other World Championships. You also played Icelander and Blitz.
But I didn't swap late on the Kano. I was locked into that Kano deck.
But you were playing Rhinar and
Worlds.
Blitz, and we got you to go Icelander and Blitz. That was a bit of a swap.
I did lock 2 weeks before though on that Icelander deck, to be fair.
Yeah. I mean, still.
Some.
You were beating the drum on Rhinar and Blitz.
Dude, I'm always beating the drum on Rhinar. It's friggin' Rhinar, dude.
I've learned that. Yeah, I've learned that.
I reckon if I had to attribute the amount of time I've spent trying to make Rhinar work in different formats of my testing, I'd have to ask Dan what he thinks. I reckon it's like 20 to 25% of my testing time, which doesn't sound like, you're like, that's not that much, right? But imagine what I could have done with that extra 20% of my time.
So in a hypothetical universe where all Flesh and Blood players attending the Pro Tour could only play the exact same amount, I would probably put Hayden in the top 8 like every single time.
I mean, I'll take it, but I don't think I'm quite that good.
Fake news.
Let's talk about metagame prediction and leading to deck selection, which is kind of what we started with. So what does good deck selection look like to you? Does it look like, okay, I found out that I think this is what the meta is going to be, roughly, these are the top 5 decks, roughly this percentage? Is it about weighing up, okay, now I look at those and I start to run the numbers of like, what are the good decks and what are the good matchups for those decks? What are the bad matchups, and how can I find the deck that's got the best spread of good matchups? Is that kind of what you're looking for? Sort of.
There's a concept here called layers of a metagame. Layer 1 is the best deck. Layer 2 is the deck that beats the deck. And layer 3 is, sometimes it's a deck that beats the deck, or it's just kind of like a rogue deck, right? Like something like Kano. I think that more often than not, it's very correct to be layer 1, and that most players actually delude themselves into going a layer deep and playing decks that are actually fundamentally worse than just the best deck. Not because it's not good against the best deck, but when you take into account the actual expected metagame in the field, the best deck is just more consistent over a long series of Swiss and just the tournament as a whole. So yeah, one example I want to point to this because it happened couple days ago was the World Championships for Marvel Snap. We had the number one most represented deck was something called Thanos. If you know Marvel, I guess you know it. But it was 35 not including some of its variants, it was over 35% of the metagame. And the other decks were around like 10% or less. And the other decks were actually like the funny thing is like that deck was by far like that is a degenerate meta, right? In terms of that is so many people ending up on the same deck. But
do you play multiple decks though on Snap?
No, sometimes, but this is a single deck format. But the differential in terms of like other decks and their like how powerful they were it's actually really small. Like the other decks were maybe 2-3% worse. Just in this game in particular, there was absolutely no reason. There was no reason to take a deck that was 2 to 3% worse. Even though the margin was small, even though you could win with the other decks, you would just take a small percentage clip when there was absolutely no reason to do so. So we led to this like very layer 1 oriented metagame. And yeah, that's how it ended up going. Like that deck won the tournament. That deck put 5 into the top 8, which was actually an upset, by the way, that it didn't put more into the top 8. But it was just a good example of where it is correct to play what is clearly the best deck. What is clearly, even if the margins are small, because they were small, there was absolutely other viable decks. It was just correct to play the best deck because you have a long sequence of Swiss rounds, and you just don't need that -1%, that -2%.
Yeah. I love this discussion because I think there's so many, it's a philosophy, right? In terms of just trying to understand. I think there's one thing. The first thing, right, is like, is the best deck always the most represented deck, right? And I'd say like my view is majority of the time it is, but honestly not always, right? I think sometimes people misattribute what the best deck is, right? Because it's contextual, because you can say the best deck is just the most powerful deck, the most powerful strategy, or is the best deck the best deck for the event in terms of, like the metagame prediction. You do your metagame prediction. It's like, okay, 35% of the format is going to be this one big deck. This doesn't happen as much in Flesh and Blood, right? Like I think Lexi was the highest at like 22% or something for Baltimore. But, you go, okay, this is the best deck. It's the most powerful deck. It's going to show up in this number. But actually maybe the best deck for the event is the deck that beats the deck as long as that deck is also really powerful and has a good matchup spread. But that's not, that doesn't, you're not guaranteed to have these things. You don't, it's not like you have, okay, the best deck, you have the best deck that beats the deck. So that's the best deck for the event. But this is the other deck's the best deck for format. And then you have this other stuff. That's not, it just doesn't just lock in that way. What usually happens is that you have a spread of a top tier, usually 1 to 3 decks often in this top tier. They're kind of in a percentage-wise 1 to 5% of each other in terms of probably power level and just linear game plans and what they do. And then you're understanding what percentage of the format is going to be those top 1 to 3 decks. And then that's the start of your metagame prediction, or how you predict the metagame. And that's like super, it changes a lot. Like it's super fluid. If I asked you this question 2 weeks ago, what percentage of the meta do you think KO is going to be versus today, what percentage of the meta do you think KO is going to be? It's going to be a different answer, I think, because we're seeing KO start to drop off a little bit. We're seeing other decks rise up like Kano and Dromai and things like this. So, what about Guardian, like Victor? I thought Victor was going to be a massive part of this, and Bravo. I thought Bravo was going to be a massive part of this Pro Tour metagame 2 weeks ago if you'd asked me that. And now I think less so. So metagame prediction is super fluid, but even like if that impacts what is the best deck, because the best deck is in theory the best deck for the event. So I think basically what I'm getting to is strip it back down when it comes to metagame prediction. What is just linear the best deck? What is just has the best strategy, is just the most powerful thing?
I find it hilarious in my experience and in my opinion that metagaming and picking the best deck for the event, or picking a deck for the event, is it's a catch-22. It's almost inherently paradoxical, your journey as a card game player, because it's funny because when you start out, you want to play the best deck. But then as you mature and then as you get more experience, you're like, I can gain an edge here. I can accurately predict this metagame and I can play something that people are not expecting. And then you come out of that tunnel. And what happens on the other side is you just play the best fucking deck. And it's just not that complicated, because more often than not, you are going to metagame yourself into a loss. You just play the best deck.
I mean, if you're looking for the 80-20, right? Which we know Brendan loves an 80-20.
Honestly, bro, it could be a 90-10, could be a 95-5. It is crazy how more often correct it is. But yeah, I do love myself a good 80-20.
I think the other thing you do as well, and I think we've experienced this, and there'll be some players out there who've definitely experienced this, is like, as you play more high-level events, I think you become less risk-adverse. You will take more risks because there's another event around the corner. You're like, okay, this is my 5th or 4th PT or whatever it is, but also there's another one coming around the corner. Like, why don't I just take the punt on this one? Maybe this is the one where I take the punt. And it's a dangerous game. It's a dangerous game taking the punt.
I think it's hubris. Card game players, they start hitting this copium bong and they're just like, I can get an edge. I'm different. I'm special. I'm ahead of the metagame. I will play a deck that is, if we had infinite amounts of data, would just be objectively less consistent, less powerful, have a lower win rate, but I can get an edge with this deck. It is hubris. I think. Okay, there's going to be outliers. There's going to be a player that breaks the metagame open. They're going to take a deck that people are not expecting. They're going to be successful. But the problem is that everybody thinks they can be that guy, and they can't. And it's unlikely. It is less likely than if you just play the best deck and you just try to show up and have it be your day with solid play.
I think because of the power of consistency in Flesh and Blood. And we've talked a lot about this before, and this could change in the future. We know that things are becoming less consistent, that generally kind of the quote-unquote best deck or the most powerful strategy, it kind of becomes apparent, and it doesn't usually change during the sequence of during a season, or actually those cards being legal, to be honest, until they get superseded. But this format does feel a little bit different, to be honest, because I think the power level of a lot of the top decks, or at least the tier 2 and above, are actually quite similar. I think that we've depowered a little bit, which is maybe a moment in time, as Brian talked about when he came on the pod. But what happens? This is kind of something that happens in testing quite regularly. This is not, this has happened in groups I've tested in. I know this has happened for a lot of people testing. This happens for individuals testing for events, right? This is kind of what happens. You go, okay, here's the best deck in the format. Let's just, for argument's sake, say it's KO at the moment, right? Okay, KO is the best deck in the format. All right, guys. What's the level 2 deck that beats KO? Okay. Here's this consistent, like strategy that beats KO. Okay. Oh, this is powerful. Maybe this is just a powerful strategy. Okay, we test it. Okay, let's test it into the gauntlet, etc. Wow, this is just a powerful deck. The cope is high. This might just be the best deck in the format, right? And then, let's try it into a couple other things. People adapt. They learn the strategy pretty quickly. Oh, this is really inconsistent. This doesn't do the thing as consistently as we thought. I'm going to move away from this. Let's move on to the next thing. And then you move to the third thing. Yeah, you try another. That's good. I like that. You try it for the viewers at home. Brendan rolled his chair backwards and did some animations with his hands in his mouth. And then you move to the third deck. You're like, okay, maybe there's something else. And I've been on this journey. I went from, okay, I don't particularly want to play KO or Dromai. I think I want to play Reiner. Start with Reiner. Wow, this is super powerful. Like, this is really good in this format. I have this really good strategy into 2 of the best decks in the format. Hey, let's test against some of the other decks I think are going to be showing up. Oh, this strategy is maybe not as consistent as I thought. Hey, I'm going to go deeper into the trenches. What about Boost Dash, Brendan? Boost Dash has to be good, right? Because
it would be nice. I would like to turn my brain off. Hell yeah. Let's see if it...
I told Brendan this, and if hey, Brendan, listen to my theory. If everyone's trying to go, like mid-rangey or like slightly left of mid-range to aggressive or slightly right to control, why don't we just do just the far left? We just go as aggressive as possible, And it was like, oh wow, this is like really powerful into KO, and then you play it in some other strategies and you get fatigued. And anyway, this kind of goes on. You can do this for ages, right? You can jump to different things, you can try different theories and strategies, but then ultimately what happens is that you come back to the kind of like most powerful and consistent decks in the format being the more obvious choices and the more safe choices, the better matchup spread. We'll talk about kind of running the numbers and playing to your spread soon. But basically, these decks, it's not that these decks aren't viable, right? Like Boost Dash or Reiner, like these could be viable strategies, but you probably need a very specific metagame for that to happen. And in Flesh and Blood, metagames are not that polarizing. Like at most, Lexi's the most we've seen at Pro Tour, and it's still less than a quarter of the field. So
yeah,
maybe Starvo was slightly higher actually.
So there's one thesis that I think is both often invalid, but is the only valid excuse I think you could have to play a worse deck. Looking at you bolted players, and it's not specialists. It's that if you're in a metagame that is immature enough, and a player base that is immature enough that you believe that people will not be able to play optimally into your deck, whether they're seeing it for the first time, whether it's a convoluted combo, like Kano PT1, people are drastically unprepared for it. Their decks are not suited to play against this deck. That is the only time that I would play a worse deck. That being said, people apply that theory in that scenario when it is not correct. Often. I do not think it is a good thesis going into modern Flesh and Blood tournaments that people will not know what my deck is, they will not be able to adapt, and I will catch them by surprise. I think back in the day was a bit more Wild West. Maybe. But that is the only time I'll play a worse deck.
I don't know. I do think that kind of atypical strategies can still be good in Flesh and Blood, but maybe not as good as they used to be. So I think the deck naturally has to be powerful as well. Like you can't just run a strategy that's like kind of inconsistent. So you need to get, like if you've got losses to give, right? Let's say over an event, I've got 2 losses to give to make top 8. If I give my 2 losses to my deck's inconsistency, and then also actually my strategy, if 1 or 2 players pick up on it, I also give losses there. That's not good enough, right? But if my deck's super consistent, but maybe is at the mercy of people understanding my strategy, I lose 1 or 2 games, but those are my losses, or maybe it's just my particular bad matchup that I think is going to be, again, metagame prediction, less than 15% of the meta, then okay, that's a bit more enticing. I'll take this for an example. Max at Worlds, right? This is what I thought Max could have been. It's like, okay, Max is like this combo Max deck that looks to land the Nitro Mechanoid suit as a deck that I was pretty close to playing it at Worlds in Barcelona this year. Matt Rogers ended up playing it. I think he's the only person who actually ended up playing it from our group, but there was about 5 people playing it across the field. It was like, okay, in theory, like you have a pretty good matchup spread. You're good into Icelander, you're really good into Guardian, and it was like looking like those are going to be the 2 most played decks at the event. Dromai can be a bit tough, but you can win it. But people also don't know your strategy, and you can just win games off the back of that. So it's like, okay, here's a deck that's pretty consistent, can pretty consistently do the thing, and has a pretty good metagame spread. And if people don't know what you're doing, you get this massive bump.
Yep.
So in theory, that is one of those decks, right?
Yeah.
Like,
let me recount to you a quick conversation. Sorry to interrupt. That I had with Matt Rogers himself. Okay, we're so testing group looking at Pro Tour LA in Discord. Hey Matt, how's Nitro Max looking? You played it Yeah, he played it at Barcelona. It's like, come on, man, why you gotta do me like that? It's like, oh, he doesn't even want to talk about it. He wouldn't even tell me. But yeah, ultimately, like, nah, it's not the deck. I just want to bring up an anecdote. I want to tell you how a true master picks a deck and metagame and predicts a metagame for a world championship.
Does it involve a coin or a dice?
Maybe. So my example is Mr. Alexander Vore. You might know him as a Kano player, but he is a very, very, very good card game player. He's been sitting in our house for days. We have this Dromai deck everybody's happy with. And night before the event, literally night before, Alexander Vore says, and he's not doing this because there's like a choice, there's a reason to. He just likes to gamble. So he's like, I'm gonna toss this dice. If I land a 6, I'm playing Rhinar. Lands a 6, show up the next morning. Alexander Vore, what are you playing? Of course he's playing Dromai. I've been testing it for a week, right? No, he's playing Rhinar. Legitimately, that is how he selected a deck. And that is card game mastery. That is the peak of metagame prediction. Toss a dice.
I think he did the best out of that group, though, didn't he, in CC?
Maybe. No, Chris. I think Chris Ioli did like super well.
Oh, I didn't know he's part of the testing group.
Yeah,
okay. Yeah, sure.
Well, part of the
He played Max. Chris Ioli played Max.
Yeah. That's how he's fresh on my
mind. So I'll circle back to the question because, yeah, honestly, it's so philosophy based in terms of it. But I think if we're to distill down the most important things when it comes to deck selection, like metagame prediction is really, really big because that's going to inform basically the kind of the wedge of where you want to look. So what I want to come back to is running the numbers, Brendan, is using a little bit of statistics. It's kind of, if you understand the metagame, you can kind of look and see what your spread is going to be, right? That one thing is playing the best deck, etc., whatever. But if you genuinely understand the format and you understand quite a few decks in the meta and you can accurately understand kind of what their matchup spreads are like, because we know there's a bunch of freaking 90-90 matchups in this game, you know, where both sides of a matchup think they're favored. But if you genuinely have a fairly good understanding of matchup spreads and what wins most of the time, what is good into each other, what has good matchups, bad matchups. If you can understand the metagame prediction, you can run the numbers and see what your spread is going to be. So if you know that, XYZ are the top 3 decks and they're going to be 50% of the metagame, if you can choose a deck that is good into all 3 of those, that is good deck selection to me. I think that is putting you in a really good spot. But again, fallacies and flesh and blood, is your matchup into those decks actually good?
Yeah. I think hubris in card game players is also another key component. Like, people just think that they're more ahead than they are. They think they're smarter than they are. They think the decks are better than they are. And they're not able to objectively evaluate things in a fair way. And that's only becomes more true as the game matures, in my opinion. That's why, like, nowadays we play in a very large testing group. And I would not be surprised if most people in that testing group end up bringing the best deck or what we think is the best deck. I think there'll be some differences because this metagame is like the margins are really small. But yeah, like I think that you're going to cook yourself more than get an edge on the field when you try to do something out of the ordinary or something special. You have your moonshot to do it, and it happens, to an extent. Michael Hamilton, Icelander, Kano PT1, like there's been decks like this, Briar Fatigue, US Nationals, like it's happened before, but it is the exception and not the example.
Yeah. And I think you also have to put a lot of time into those decks to really make sure you've got great game plans. And this is something I want to go on to next, which is when it comes to deck selection, is I talked about, at the start, I'm given 4 points, maybe even 5 points to I think it's 4 points to reps, right? So regardless of what you choose, whether it's the best deck or it's a deck with like this kind of, it's a bit more atypical, it's going to do something that people don't expect, you have to have really good game plans, especially if you're going to play those decks, because you're probably playing a slightly less consistent or slightly less raw power most of the time. I'll say that there's definitely exceptions to that where people just kind of find the deck, right? Like Tarek Patel at US Nationals or Matt Folks at UK Nationals playing a deck that just was far and away more powerful, right? For instance. But most of the time, you're going to be playing a deck that's going to be a little bit underpowered because people are getting so many reps these days. They're playing so many games. There's events that happen before. I mean, look, we've already had like 2 or 3 Battle Hardens plus PTI events, right, happen. So there's information on Classic Constructed. So, to make one of these choices, you really need to, I think, have really refined game plans. But look, honestly, I think it is doable. It's just most of the time, you're probably better off landing on on what is usually perceived as a top deck. One thing I do want to talk about, though, when it comes to metagame prediction and deck selection and choosing the best deck is I feel like over the last couple of events, it's not been 100% clear. Since Baltimore, I feel like most events, it's not been 100% clear what is the best deck for that event.
I think
what was the best deck heading in towards?
Well, I think even post-event, it's debatable, which is hilarious because I thought that the best deck for the World Championships was pretty clear.
Dromai, right?
Yeah, and I didn't necessarily hate that that opinion post event. Icelander looked pretty fucking good though, I'm not gonna lie. Like it looked pretty good. So I don't know. I would still say that I think the Dromai was not by a massive margin, but I thought it was the best deck going into the World Championships. Nevertheless, I think that Icelander was a pretty reasonable pick if you had that deck in your arsenal and you could beat Dromai, which was not an easy thing to do.
Mm-hmm. The other piece of it as well, when it comes to that, is like the best deck is not the best hero, right? So there is card choice and card selection that comes into that as well, and I think that's a big part of deck selection that we should probably touch on, which is like, let's say, like the best list of the best hero for that current meta is actually really important, and I think we've seen that time and time again where it's like people make, for instance, let's look at Icelander. People were playing no attack actions in their Icelander. Michael Hamilton walks along with his Wounded Bulls and his Fendel's Fighting Spirits and has a superior version of the Icelander deck to come into an event, right? And that's quite a drastic example, but you do see it, right? It's like, I think you look at Icelander lists in the top 8 of Worlds, and I think those lists were like really refined for that meta. I think I look at Shing's list. I think Shing was really set up for that meta. I think Shing probably called the meta pretty close to what it was going to be, and Shing came with a list that was really adapted to what that meta would look like, as opposed to maybe some of the other Icelanders who didn't do as well, who didn't make those calls, right? So there is this other piece when it comes to deck selection, which is metagame prediction really feeds into it, is like making sure that you have the right build. So I think we're walking into this event right now, and it looks like it's going to be a little bit more spread than in terms of meta spread than maybe we thought 1 to 2 weeks ago. There's new players entering. There's probably, I wouldn't be surprised to see. Usually, there's a kind of a stat I like, Brendan, which is like what makes up the first 50% of the metagame, and usually it's 3 to 3.5 decks make up, sometimes 4, the first 50% of the metagame. I think we could be an event where it's like 5 to 6 decks make up the top 50% of the metagame, the first 50%, whatever you want to call it. Like we're actually in a wider meta than I think we have been before, and it's actually starting to develop. And usually it solidifies a little bit. Worlds was pretty close to this. I think it was 4 decks made up top 50. Yeah. So it's an interesting one. But those, when you think about that metagame prediction and that spread, and if you're going to pick a deck, whether you're a specialist or you're picking a deck for the meta and deck selecting, you have to also card select and come up with the right configuration.
100%. I mean, nothing to add there. I am in agreement.
What does bad deck selection look like?
Playing Kanos most of the time. To be, it's just like, I don't know. I think that if you're, it's weird because we'll talk about specialists. We've talked about it before. We'll talk about it in the future, but there are people that specialize in heroes and they do well consistently. Again, I think they're the example. They're the exception and not the example. And then oftentimes when you pick a hero that you either identify with or you like have some sort of role playing aspect to, and you're picking it for reasons that are outside of its subjective power, usually you're making a mistake and it's not going to pay off, in my opinion. And I think that happens a lot with Kano Copers. I think it had a lot with Illusionist Copers in previous metagames. Like it's a thing. It's absolutely a threat when you're preparing for a metagame. It's like you'll feel this itch, and you're like, I really like that dragon deck. I like that. Wow, I like the 32 damage deck. That's really fun. And it's like, is that really the right choice? Usually not. I mean, I still make it regardless. I still make that choice. Yeah. But this is do as I say, not as I do.
Okay, let's finish up on do as you say, not as you do. Then, what to you? Do you think if you were to say, I'm going to refine my process for deck selection moving forward, what are the things that you want to make sure you do, or the things that you think you should be doing to really hone in on good deck selection heading to, let's say, Pro Tour Amsterdam, for instance, or PQ Season 5?
I'd probably be in a similar testing group, like a larger testing group with a lot of differing opinions. And I would just pick the deck that came out of that process like 2 weeks before, lock it, get a lot of reps in person, and just play that. Because I know that sounds pretty easy and obvious, but that is not what happens. That is not what happens.
Yeah, Where's this deck that's coming out 2 weeks before that there's at least some, even a semi consensus on, Brennan? You have to point that one to me. So the thing is,
even if I gave you that, even if I told you what that deck was, you wouldn't believe it. You would still want, like, everybody's in this like hamster wheel of, trying to find the new best deck of this week. And the best deck could have been a deck that we found out was fundamentally powerful and that we locked to like 2 weeks ago from now, so 4 weeks before the Pro Tour. And now that we have infinite reps on and we've refined game plans and we've got a really tight list, that could be the best deck. But everybody wants to find the extra small percentage of edge with a hero that they like more, or that they think will be less expected, or they think is like, oh, it's actually good in this metagame, not last week's metagame, but this metagame. It's a little bit of a rat race, and that's fine. I mean, that's what makes testing stressful. That's what makes
I hate it.
Yep,
so
it makes testing fun. It does, to an extent, if you're into that. But yeah, I mean, that's the game. Like, the thing is when you prepare for a high level event, it really never goes perfectly. It's never how you draw it up. It's very chaotic, and I find this with even the best players in the world.
Yeah, I was gonna say, don't even worry about a high level event. This just happens at any event. Like if you're prepping in any kind of way, with whether it be by yourself or with others, like, new information is going to come to light, and it's like, it's just a question of like, where do you draw the line at the information coming in? Because a lot of the time you continue to process this information, and Brendan's right, you just go in circles. You come back to where you started.
It's FOMO.
It's what?
It's literally FOMO. It's literally fear of missing out. You hear it's like, oh, Jeremiah might be the thing. You're like, oh shit, I was locked on KO.
What? I've written that off. Why?
Yeah, you're like, I was locked on KO. You're telling me this is like so much better. It's like, I got to try this out. And it's just like, you just do that over and over and over again. And then sometimes what happens is you're like a week before and you're like, wow, that deck we were playing 4 weeks ago, that's the deck. And yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's some dopamine that's going on there when everybody's like, oh, I found a new thing. And everybody's like, holy shit, let me see. It's like,
people want the context to why I think that people swap last minute. It's all this. It's the information coming to light. It's a point in time, making a decision at a point in time. And it's iterative, but it's also repetitive, and it's circular, and it's such an odd, it's a paradox in some ways. It's and it's self-fulfilling. It's such an odd piece. But I think, to just harp back on what you said, I think honestly, when it comes to deck selecting, I think Brennan's right. If you can kind of nail down at least like roughly what that metagame is going to look like, honestly, metagames don't shift massively as much as people think is the other thing as well. People go, within 2 weeks the metagame can massively shift. It's like, it does shift, but not to the extent, I think if you went and looked at it, it'd probably be 20% different to what it was 2 weeks ago. And it's not 50 to 80% different. Yep. So if you can make a good deck selection, you can lock yourself in 1 to 2 weeks before, probably more like 2, nail down your game plans, feel really confident with the reason you chose. And you're going to get losses, right? You're not going to win every single frigging game you play in testing. That's the thing. If you're winning more than 50% of games into like your players who are just as good as you, if not better, and understand your game plans, you're probably doing a good job. So lock in early as possible, test, get the reps in, understand the meta, and just make a good choice. Like, often going deep, like Brendan says, is just it's a fallacy. It's not going to work out.
Don't waste deck slots on teching for Kano. Don't tech for Kano. Yeah, honestly, like,
you don't want to see my deck list, bro.
Sometimes you just got to embrace it. Say fuck it. Just pick. I don't know. It's tough. At this point, I'm just a fat boomer, and I'm like, I like my draw card combo fun deck. I kind of just like it. So if anybody gives me an inkling and an excuse to play it, I just start to get that itch. I'm like, shit. I do.
Give me back.
Go ahead.
Just give me back the time with 4 decks. Just want to choose one of them.
Just 4 decks. 4 decks and 1 deck that is fucking obviously overpowered. That's what I like. And nobody knows about it but me. Nobody knows about it. Those were the good old days of Flesh and Blood.
That's the dopamine hit you're searching for, dude. That is.
Well, yeah, that's what's made it hard, is because we were able to do that a lot in the early metagames. Like, I think back of the first class constructed tournament in New Zealand. I think about the first Road to National season. I mean, that was ridiculous, like how much of an edge we had on everybody. The first Pro Tour. So like, it is programmed in our brains to be like, oh, we can do this, but I don't think it's really that reasonable anymore.
Yeah, I agree. This has been an interesting discussion. Honestly, this is probably not quite the pod I had laid out just as we're wrapping up here. I thought this was going to be a little bit more structured discussion about kind of how to select deck. Instead, we kind of talked a lot about
It's a therapy
philosophy
session.
in testing. Well, I just think we ended up landing on a lot of like key things when it comes to the philosophy of how you test, how you play, how you land on decks, and how you select decks, and especially when it comes to metagame, right? And honestly, like I think it is just so true. It's just so repetitive. It's the same things, the same patterns every time. And I think if anyone wants like the biggest high level takeaway from testing between different groups, testing with some of the best players in the world, and testing for these high level events, and that you can distill down to any level. Honestly, my number one thing, Brendan, is like take the kind of like the early learnings as much as you can of just like the top level knowledge, like in terms of, I mean, like keep it high level, find one of the best decks, lock it in, play it, test it.
Yep. I used to think the specialists in our testing groups, like back in the day, I thought they were nerds, just play their Bravo no matter what. Like they're just waiting for their time. But I'll tell you, Hayden, once you stare long enough into the abyss, it stares back at you. And now I'm that person. I'm that player. I want to lock on my deck. I just want to play my deck. And it's like, if I could get 2% edge by playing Jeremiah in this tournament, but I have to figure it out 3 days before, I'd rather just take the 3% loss. I'd rather just be more practiced. It's just funny. Like there's many different ways to prepare and play Flesh and Blood, and surprisingly, all of them are valid. And that's what you figure out as you get more experience and that you go along this journey, is that there are many different ways in which you can prepare for these events. The only advice I can give you is just to give yourself plenty of thought to practice the deck. And just, I think like locking early is just correct. Like it's going to happen. I promise you, someone's going to come up to you. Honestly, go to the fucking banquet before the Pro Tour and people are like, everybody's bringing Icelander. And you're like, oh shit, well, I can't play my deck anymore. I don't think you should switch on the night before.
Dude, I'm not going to the banquet anymore. Yeah, stuff this.
The banquet is like PSYOP Central. It's crazy. But actually, it was completely true. Before Barcelona, like the Wolfpacks on Bravo, it was like, that is the worst PSYOP I've ever heard in my life. That deck is terrible in this metagame. And it was like, everybody's playing Icelander. I was like, what do you mean? Jeremiah's the best deck. How is everybody playing Icelander? That was true. And so was the Wolfpack thing, surprisingly. Yeah, banquet. The banquet buzz it's contagious.
It's real.
Yeah.
All right. Take us out, Brendan.
All right. Well, if you listen to this podcast, you enjoy it. And if you love Bolton, hit that subscribe. We're on YouTube at youtube.com/ArsenalPass. Twitter's at BrendanAPG, Finn_Dale. Number one thing you can do for us is leave us a review on pod platforms, Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It helps us keep going. Special thank you to all the Patreon subscribers. You are the backbone of this channel and why we've lasted for so long. And lastly, shout out to Magnolia Games for sponsoring these episodes of Arsenal Pass. Don't forget to use the code ArsenalPass10 when checking out, so they know you
Arsenal
can.
10.
Yes, Arsenal 10. We should really make it. We should get both. But Arsenal 10 when checking out, so they know you came from the podcast. Thank you all so much for listening. We'll see you next week.